Over the last 30 years, remarkably little has been done to document the history of financial, therapeutic, and operational policy with respect to addiction and behavioral treatment. As part of our mission, C4 has developed a series of films capturing this important oral history.
Are we going to be clinical scientists, or are we going to be artists? Scientific method involves being able to test results, being able to repeat results, not only by yourself, specifically others. It's the rigor, it's the structure of medicine and of science, really, that's missing. I'm not saying that they're entirely missing. We need a tune-up in a big way there. And that's coming, whether we like it or not.
Ben Levenson is chairman of the Levenson Foundation. From 2009 to 2017, Ben founded and led the nationally recognized Origins Behavioral Health Care.
We are being absorbed by medicine for the first time. There is a tremendous decentralization in the ability and the right to provide treatment.
His innovative work on multi-staged continuums of interdisciplinary care inspired a generation of providers across the United States to offer more chronic-based formats of treatment. Ben counsels leading payers, providers, and policymakers as they transition to multi-pathway recovery ideologies, science-based treatment practices, and clinical processes that honor a patient's right to be fully and fairly informed of all risks and benefits of all known treatment options, which may dramatically affect the quality of their remaining life and mortality.
The field has been orphaned from medicine from really its inception. And in some ways, it's been good for us and good for our patients. In the long run, what we missed are critical to good practice. We missed some of the mechanics of medicine, the rigor of medicine that ultimately safeguard patient rights, best practice, and ensure improving and better outcomes. We've gone the way of ideologists instead of scientists. Everyone's done the best with what we had. We've been underpinned with the 12-step philosophy, and along the way, it's to a degree supplanted scientific method. The way I would talk about what's happening now is we're really looking at moving from a single pathway ethos of treatment and recovery to a multi-pathway ethos of treatment and recovery. This is all part of the opioid crisis and the scrutiny that's been applied to the field. I think that there have been people who otherwise would be looking at other really complex social problems. Given the opioid crisis, they've turned their attention to the problem and seeking to understand that, but also what solution does the country have for this problem? And in looking at the treatment field as a solution for the problem, or at least what we have to offer, I think that they've uncovered some things that need to be looked at. So it's a pretty complex piece. It's a pretty complex transition that's occurring. There are a lot of stakeholders, and there are tremendous pressures. A lot's being asked of providers now, but ultimately we're having to pivot ideologically, and we will have to pivot from an infrastructure standpoint to really fully respond to the problem at hand and also be prepared for the future. It's a big job.
If you choose to accept this,
I think along with the balance of the field, sure. I think that it's full of some of the best human beings I've ever known, and in fact, the fundamental characteristic I think that I've encountered is is caring for the people that we serve. And actually, in some cases, caring so much that it has gotten in the way of what might be the best treatment for the person. Let me say, a lot of us have lived experience in recovery. People don't just kind of stumble into the treatment field. Most of us end up here out of personal experience, whether it's our own recovery or someone else's that's close to us that we love. And we become passionate. To recover from a deadly illness is it's an unbelievably powerful experience. I know for me, I became enamored with, oh my gosh, first of all, I had a pretty serious case, and to get to a place where that was arrested, I wanted that for everybody. I really wanted that for everybody. And I think that I wanted the type of freedom and the type of purpose and the sense of connectedness that I experienced in my personal recovery. I wanted that so desperately for my patients, and I don't think I'm unique, that I may have invited people down a pathway that wasn't appropriate for them. And I think part of what has to happen is I think we have to start to own that. I've been wrong before in that way. And we can do better.
But being wrong doesn't mean you are wrong.
No, not at all. Being wrong is fine. But being wrong and continuing to behave like I'm not is a problem. And so, look, as we fought so hard for addiction to be recognized as a deadly disease. We fought hard for that because we wanted to combat stigma. We believe it's scientifically correct, but we also knew that to the extent that people started to perceive addictive illness and addictive processes as a brain-based disease, that they perhaps could, show some more empathy and compassion, and kind of destigmatize. So on the one hand, we're arguing desperately for this to be recognized as a deadly disease. And the problem, I think one of the problems right now is that on the other hand, we're not treating deadly disease in a way that's entirely consistent with how deadly disease is treated elsewhere in medicine. What do I mean by that? An example would be informed consent. We're a single pathway ethos. That's where we've come from. And so people come into treatment, and the first thing we do is we detox them and put them on a pathway to abstinence. That's what successful recovery has been defined as in part. But the problem is there are other pathways of recovery that we know about. If a person is diagnosed with stage 3 cancer, the treating team will sit down and describe for them what they believe they're suffering from. They'll diagnose them. And then they'll outline for them what the range of known treatment options are. They'll talk about the risks of each of those options. They'll talk about the known benefits or potential benefits of those options. They'll probably try to explain the expected outcome in that particular case for that option, right? Certainly, they'll recommend what they think the patient should be considering as their course. And then they say, what do you want to do? And in addiction treatment, that's part of the rigor of the practice of medicine that we have escaped for most of our life, for all of our life. what is there to consent to? I mean, you're going to get sober, right? And that's not the case anymore. So the problem arises when we take away the power of self-determination from another human being. Or even worse, when there are treatment options, in some cases, say for the opioid use disorder, that reasonable people and reasonable data show reduces mortality by significant amounts, yet we don't describe the risks and benefits and potential outcomes of that. We just put them down an abstinence track, conceivably increasing the likelihood of mortality in some cases. But I want to be clear, I think that still arises out of care. It arises out of wanting so desperately for our patients to recover, to lead full and free lives. But unpacking that and I think rejoining the disciplines and the rigor and the practice of medicine are going to be critical for addiction treatment as a field to maintain our integrity and to progress. I wanted to be a doctor, and then I smoked too much pot. I decided to do that. Look, I wanted to be, I think, in the helping profession. I wasn't sure what that would look like. Addiction derailed me early on, and I wasn't able to engage in the educational track that I would have needed to become a physician. But I knew I wanted to help people, and addiction blotted that out. It blotted out a lot, I think, as it does for many of us. But I wanted to help people. I remember kind of the fork in the road, and this was back behind. I was in the back house of a person's home that I probably shouldn't have been at in the first place, and I remember he lit some marijuana, and I smelled that for the first time, and it was. I thought that smelled pretty evil, really. I knew it was a no-no, and I remember in the moment making a conscious decision that, you know what, I'm going to see what this is. I'm going to see what this is about. I couldn't have articulated to you at the time that that I was maybe seeking to get okay, in a way. Certainly couldn't have articulated that to you. But that's how I experienced it. And the truth is, it worked really great for a long time for me, until it didn't. I had some life circumstances that let me escape some consequences pretty seriously for a while. It wasn't until almost a decade later that while I woke up one morning, or I was still awake, and the night before, and had you been at my home, you would have looked around. There was a Jeep in the driveway. There was still art on the walls, and stereo and television were still there. You would have said, Ben, I think things look okay. But my internal sky was falling. And I was fortunate. My older brother, who we eventually lost to an overdose, Oxycontin, one of the early Oxycontin deaths. Fortunately, he had been to treatment only a year before, and I reached out to him, and I was in treatment that night. It would prove to be the first of many for me, and 20 or so. And ultimately, all of that experience of chronicity and episodic treatment really is what inspired me to enter the field. I knew that for me, while I was able to access the finest care in the world by the finest practitioners in the world, this was at a time when these kind of 30-day episodic acute interventions were the standard. And for me, it was insufficient. I needed more. So that really did inspire my work in the field, where we, in 2007, started building kind of self-contained, multidisciplinary, multi-staged continuums of care, where patients were able to develop and maintain really strong clinical alliance all the way through, a longer phased treatment experience. And also, we really worked to reproportion the spiritual and medical and clinical components so that there was better emphasis on all three. It's an interesting time in the arc of addiction treatment. We're in an existential crisis, is where we're at. A lot of my colleagues reasonable people argue with me about whether that's true or not. We are being absorbed by medicine for the first time. There is a tremendous decentralization in the ability and the right to provide treatment. Traditionally, treatment has been limited to, and the provision of care has been limited to a really small class and small group of institutions who have these remotely located concentrations of residential kind of settings, residential beds. And now there is a massive decentralization and localization of care occurring. A physician now who is waivered for Suboxone can provide addiction treatment at his neighborhood office. That's extremely different from the way things have been. And couple that with this movement and really reasonable demand by the payers and by policymakers and by consumers for accountability around practice. It's rather existential for the traditional Minnesota model. And it'll be really interesting to see how institutional providers make this migration. I think it's going to be challenging. I recognize that I have to love the patients more than I love the field. It's always been safer for me to do that. It's been guiding for me to do that. Because I become less attached to the methods and the means and more attached to the outcomes. And I think that that's where we've made some mistakes. I think we've become overly attached to pathways and a little less, maybe a little under-attached to the outcomes in exchange. And I'm excited to watch that change. We're really able to measure outcomes now for the first time. And so being able to inform practice, inform our systems architectures, with all of that is promising. Ultimately, while painful, I think we're going to see better care, more throughput, so more people getting care, and good business all at the same time. When I came into the field, I was honestly surprised when I learned that we had not measured outcomes in ways that were consistent with the way the rest of medicine at least attempts to do. Nothing that leveraged the degree of technology that we have. I called my brother and I said, listen, I'm discharging all these patients and I have no idea what's going on with them after we treat them. Look, we've failed to measure outcomes in ways consistent with the balance of medicine. And because of that, our practices are liable for some pretty serious scrutiny. I have some physicians in my family. I've been around conversations where we're critical of their practice. Mm-hmm. I've noticed that they don't take it personally. When we criticize a treatment program, for their practices, there is some sensitivity. And so what's going on here? I don't see orthopedists who have a secret sauce with the way that they do knee replacements. Some are more skillful than others. And there are variances in outcome because a technician or a surgeon may be more skillful. But look, they're sharing outcome data. They have the mechanisms and the community tools in place to do that. They have shared standards, and they have delineated processes for practice, and so on. In this field, we don't. We almost, in a way, act like my program is better or that program is best. That's scary. And so why outcomes are important is because it helps us unpack, number one, what's even going on with our patients after we treat them. I think America today would be shocked if they really knew that we're like a bunch of surgeons who really don't know what's going to happen when we cut you open. We know what we want, but we don't have strong data sets that point to when we do this, in cases like that, these things happen. We don't have that. And outcomes and outcome collection and loop back and research loop back are all things that will start to give us the ability to get closer to that. I don't think we're going to proceduralize behavioral medicine, but I think that we can get a hell of a lot closer than where we're at, and we need to. So yeah, I wanted to know what was going on with my patients. I mean, I wouldn't know if a patient relapsed or not until I heard they admitted at another facility through the rumor mill. I don't think that's acceptable. We need to be up close and following them. So we built a whole company a second company on the side that did just that, and they've been battling to find out how to conduct that and do it in a way that's sustainable. And they finally landed on a great model where they provide, or the largest provider of peer support, post-treatment peer support services in the United States. They have 70 million American lives contracted into their care. I think they're the only ones who have American lives contracted into their care. But secreted inside of this peer support service is a very sophisticated algorithm-driven data collection capacity that provides real-time insight into what's going on with these patients after we treat them. And we're learning a lot about the family systems in recovery, but also starting to connect up the practice, the kind of the chart data, the treatment data with kind of the outcome data, and build correlative understandings between the two. It's critical to moving forward and doing better. If we took an alcoholic fireman and we admitted him, the same person, right, and we admitted him at the 5 best brand known programs in the country, and they put this person through their multidisciplinary assessments, and they took a stab at an initial care plan, and we could take those treatment plans and set them side by side on a table. It's possible that one plan would have this person dancing around fire. Another plan would have them engaged in heavy psychodrama and DBT and equine therapy. Another would have them in 12-step immersion, right? Another would have them on a medication-assisted track. That has to change. And I care a lot about that right now because it's indefensible. It's okay, I think, for programs to specialize in a philosophy, right? Or track, or pathway. That's fine. But we need to do a much better job explaining to the patients that we do that. If I were an oncologist who was happy to prescribe radiation, but I was ideologically opposed to chemotherapy, that's fine. If everybody that I admitted only needed radiation, I guess that's okay. But what about the patients who we're admitting who also need chemotherapy? But it doesn't stop there. The issue is, in many cases, we're not describing to the patient that they also would benefit from chemotherapy, and that we don't do that. And that means your outcome is impacted in this way, right? So I really hope that the future has us a little less married to pathways and more married with outcomes. I think that we have a shift to make towards patient centricity, towards patient empowerment. I think that as the data comes, that will be helpful. I think it'll give us confidence to help the patients make better informed decisions, better informed consent. We have a long way to go. I think it's going to be messy, but at the end of the day, like I've said, I think patients ultimately will benefit, and I think that the field will benefit. We're going to grow up a little bit more, and it's time.
So what's missing?
There's wide disparity now about like what is a successful outcome? What are outcomes, right? To some people, they measure it with one data point, sustained abstinence. That defines success. To most others, we're looking at life domain improvements, and so that's evolving too. But what's missing? Standardization, agreement, collective practice. We have to decide, are we going to be clinical scientists or are we going to be artists? Because I think that it's reasonable to argue that for a while we may have behaved like artists masquerading as scientists. And in some cases, we still may be doing that. The scientific method involves being able to test results, being able to repeat results, not only by yourself, specifically others. It's the rigor, it's the structure of medicine and of science, really, that's missing. And the ethics that come with that, or the expected ethics that come with that, all of those, I'm not saying that they're entirely missing, but we need a tune-up in a big way there, and that's coming whether we like it or not.
Who's going to make it happen?
So policymakers, payers in particular, and the consumers are demanding it. Look, people don't want their grandfather's rehab anymore. Generation Y and Generation Z, these are very, very different consumers, including of medical services. We're going to have to adapt. I think that there's a shift in perspective that we have to have, and part of the problem is that this binary perspective on addiction and treatment and recovery, where if it's not abstinence, then it's a failure, and that's just, in my work in the balance of the world, it just turns out that that's not how billions and billions of human beings happen to see it or experience it. It's convenient. It's a really clean way to think about it. It's not reality. We have resisted things like harm reduction in the United States to tremendous consequence for our brother and sister addicts and alcoholics. I don't know that a person actually makes it into abstinence without having benefited from harm reduction. But the moment we do, we turn around and say that guy's not entitled to it. Don't do that for that person. I don't get it. I don't think it's consistent with love and service. When we look at the type of services we even offer for addiction, we have all of these services that we've developed that exist once you've agreed to detox. Well, not everybody's ready to detox. I mean, there were a lot of days that I was not ready to detox. Right? I would propose that everybody in an addictive process, there are a lot of days that aren't the day to ask them to detox. So the question arises, what can we do for them? And the answer is there's a whole body of evidence-based strategies and interventions that we can deliver to them that dramatically increase the likelihood of them staying alive, right? And improving the domains of health and domains of their life, and ultimately, potentially, making it to abstinence, with the proviso that they even want to. It's not the only destination. It's not the premise that our system is built on. It's not the premise that we operate with. It's fascinating. On the one hand, we argue, and rightfully, that the brain disease of addiction, impacts the ability for us to mediate the power of choice, because it exists at the mesolimbic level, and really the prefrontal can't override it at the end of the day. In 12-step, we talk about page 24 and having lost the power of choice in drink. And that's really serious. We really hold on to that. But then we practice this thing called tough love. See, I think tough love makes for tougher funerals. And it's nice, and sometimes it gets people into treatment. Not at all when they've elected to do so. But talk to the parents that did it. Talk to the loved ones that did it and lost the loved one. There's a better way. Let's just love them. Let's help them. The research is really clear today, too. If we create feelings of shame, rejection, disconnection, failure, increased crisis, okay, it doesn't make for a greater likelihood of sustained abstinence. It makes for measurably increased use. That's what it makes for. That needs to change. So we have this massive gap in the front end of our private and social treatment system called early client engagement or harm reduction, right? So we've really turned our resources to helping normalize harm reduction. And there's this belief that harm reduction is somehow oppositional with abstinence. In no way are they mutually exclusive whatsoever. They're both part of an evidence-based continuum of recovery, right? And so it's things like that that are important right now. There's no, we're surely not gonna solve or adequately respond to the opioid crisis, which, by the way, is really a fentanyl-contaminated drug supply crisis. Until we're not going to be able to adequately respond to that until we really enhance our ability to meet people where they're really at through harm reduction and endeavor to not leave them there. Look, there's a program I'm going to be at in Rome next week. They have literally a full stage of harm reduction with mobile, safer injection units on the front end of their program. They have opioid agonist therapies as recovery options at the admission and detox level. They have multi-year abstinence-based residential programs, all within the same culture, all under a shared philosophy. To us, that can't exist. But here's what happens. This year they saved 2,500 lives in their vans or at the back of their vans, right? And here's what happens. People pull up in a car and they get out in their coat and tie. And they come over to the back of the van, they get a fentanyl test strip. They test the dope. They give the strip back because this place further analyzes it and creates a real-time heat map of known contaminants by geography. They do their injection. They go back to work. They pick their kids up from school. They go to soccer practice. They put them to bed. They go back to work in the morning. That's the truth about the way some people choose to live. And we have to get over that. Who are we to tell them how they must live? It's not right. We're not telling them how they must live, right? Well, maybe not. But we're sure not helping reduce their risks. And I propose we do that. We've really surrendered most of our authoritativeness and credibility, frankly, even around defining what addiction treatment and recovery are. And the reason is because as science and medicine have come along with the rigor of research and said, here are the outcomes we're able to obtain, the field has not been able to stand up and say anything. And so where does this all go? I mean, residential is dead. We've overdosed on residential treatment. It's the payers and financially responsible parties, are actively seeking ways to obtain equal or better outcomes for a quarter of the cost. And the thing is that they can. Turns out, going away for treatment isn't best. Turns out obtaining care and building connections in the community where you plan on sustaining recovery is best. So that means localization, accountability of not just practice, but accountability of care. So how does that come into place 20 years sooner than later? It comes through risk-shared reimbursement models. I mean, the fee-for-service model that we all have enjoyed for so long is going away. We are being and will be reasonably forced to take a stake in how well our patients actually do. So this divorce from ideology and this new dance with science, how do we make that happen 20 years sooner? Well, the way we purchase treatment can change that. If you want to see an ideological divorce happen overnight, you make a provider's profit margins contingent on how well their patient actually does. You realign provider financial interest with patient wellness, patient outcome. And you're going to see providers wake up. My prediction is this: we will see the birth of the medical home for people who use drugs. I'm talking about you, if I'm a person who uses drugs and I'm commercially insured, I will be asked to obtain my primary medicine from a provider in network who has deep specialization on board that it includes addiction, medicine, and psychiatry. And longitudinally, I will see these people. And should I need detox, induction onto addiction medicines, psychiatric care, stabilization, inpatient even, or outpatient, care, I'll obtain that there. Because that's really the only way a provider can go at risk for the whole health of an individual. They have to be able to have the ability to affect that person's health. So if I'm only treating you for 30 days, I can't even play in the new paradigm of healthcare revenue. How can I be responsible for your welfare in month 11 if I only treated you for month 1? I can't. But that's exactly where it's going.